Hey everyone, I'm John and thanks for joining me here in the Boneyard. For this episode, I thought we could take a dip into a few movies that every serious horror fan needs to see. These are the eerie, atmospheric, sometimes overlooked movies that shaped my love of the horror genre in a big way. I'll talk about the unique tone of each film, why they still haunt me, and the wild stories behind their production. So please join me this episode as we take a look at these retro classics of 1960s horror. Dementia XIII, 1963, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Before Coppola redefined cinema with The Godfather and Apocalypse Now, he was a 21-year-old fresh out of UCLA film school. One of his first jobs, as with many young Hollywood directors such as Martin Scorsese, Jonathan Demme, Penelope Spheris, and Joe Dante, to name but a very few, was working under the king of low-budget horror, the brilliant Roger Corman, a self-made producer behind classics such as The Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh my God, don't stop now!
And Attack of the Crab Monsters. A filmmaker whose place in film history is legendary, but that's for another video. Dementia XIII was Corman and Coppola's attempt to make a Hitchcock-style thriller on a shoestring budget. And Corman gave the young Coppola total creative control with the simple parting words, "Make it scary and make it fast." Words I'm sure that movie mogul lived by in those days in the early 1960s. According to Coppola, he had proved himself to Corman as a general assistant, recording sound on set, basically anything that needed to be done. And when Corman needed ideas for his next movies, Coppola wrote a one-page treatment. And Corman said, in Coppola's own words, "Okay kid, you can make that if you can make it for $20,000. And then I would suggest going to Ireland to shoot it because everyone there speaks English." So basically, that was how I got this wonderful chance, how a poor theatre student got to make a first film. Corman named it Dementia XIII because there had been a movie called Dementia. And he thought that if he called it Dementia XIII, every 13th day of every month, someone, maybe, would book the film. Corman, always the entertainer, but more so the prolific producer, always had money making and time on his mind. So off Coppola went to Ireland and shot Dementia XIII in just 9 days, quite an achievement, considering he was writing the actual script the night before they would shoot the pages. Why I wanted to include the film in this video is because you can clearly see an astonishing talent being born in Coppola. In it, he blends gothic horror, a genre I absolutely love, with the early slasher framework years before films like Halloween and Friday the 13th would solidify these genre tropes. Of course, Dementia XIII wasn't seen half as widely as those slasher classics, but it was only meant to be a quick turnover movie that would make a quick profit in drive-in theaters and then most likely never be seen again. But time has proven that if a movie is made with genuine passion, it is well-executed film. With filmmaking techniques in mind that are way above your pay grade, it can last the ravages of time and stand out against the crowd. Dementia XIII has certainly proven that if you make a decent genre film with the right mix of elements, there will always be an audience for it. And as recently as 2021, Dementia XIII was given a Francis Ford Coppola director's cut on Blu-ray from Vestron Video, and that is a great release. With the emphasis on the low budget, this movie is all about atmosphere, and what really stands out is Coppola's direction. There are beautiful creative camera angles of the wonderful sets and locations, stark black and white lighting, and a dreamlike quality to the horror that almost feels experimental in some places. Corman did later hire another director to shoot extra scenes to juice up the horror, which led to a famously disjointed tone in early versions of the movie. But that's also part of the earlier movie's charm. And if you don't like it, there's always the director's cut. Dementia XIII is a classic, and I would also say a retro 1960s horror movie that was experimenting with genre tropes years before the slasher took off, and it makes this video because it's a raw and early look at a master filmmaker experimenting with the genre that I love.
Don't touch her!
I waited a long time for this moment. If we are successful today, it may well be that we have the cure for cancer.
Island of Terror, 1966, directed by Terence Fisher. This is a classic British horror movie with a retro sci-fi edge, a genre made popular by the Quatermass movies.
BR7, hello, BR7, Green, Reichenheim, Karoo.
Victor.
Are you able to receive me? Over.
TV shows, and of course the legendary Doctor Who.
Now drop your weapons, or I'll kill him with this deadly jelly baby.
Being a British film fan who grew up watching 50s and 60s sci-fi horror movies, I may be a little too fond of this movie.
Is that a pit stop or the checkered flag?
I don't know. But in the meantime, you'll find my dressing gown in the bathroom.
But it's certainly one that I think any retro movie fans who love films similar, very similar in fact, to Dave the Triffids, or even TV shows like Star Trek with their goofy looking rubber monsters, will enjoy this one with a few friends and a few beers for watch-alongs. At least, that's how I seem to enjoy it best these days. It's also one of the weirdest creature features that I remember seeing as a kid, and that's why I wanted to include it. Island of Terror was directed by Terence Fisher, who was Hammer Studios' golden boy, responsible for reinventing Dracula and Frankenstein in glorious Technicolor. Although it may have the premise and tone of something like Hammer's The Quatermass Experiment, as well as starring Hammer regular, the iconic Peter Cushing, this isn't actually a Hammer movie. It even used Bray Studios, famous for being the home of Hammer for some of its sequences. Hammer moved to Elstree Studios in 1966, but still owned and rented Bray Studios out, so this film ended up using it. It's funny how film history goes. This film is set in Ireland, but was shot in UK in Buckinghamshire and the Channel Islands, so the movie definitely has that iconic and retro 1960s British monster movie vibe about it. But as it's not a Hammer movie, over the years, it's not really been as widely appreciated or as well known. So I thought I'd give it some love here in the Boneyard. What I really liked about Island of Terror back in the day was that it isn't your standard gothic tale. Here, scientists accidentally create boneless creatures called silicates.
Good Lord, what's that?
While trying to cure cancer. And these silicates kill by liquefying human bones. And why I wanted to include it in this discussion is because that's pretty grisly stuff, even if the effects are 1960s as hell. The film makes great use of its island locations. It's isolated, there's no escape, no help coming, and the dread is amplified by Peter Cushing's calm, analytical performance as always.
We've discovered a body without any trace of bone in it. No bone? You certain? That's unbelievable.
Cushing insisted on doing all of his own stunts for the movie, including the infamous scene where he orders someone to amputate his hand for fear of infection.
Brian,
I adore the effects in this movie, and as a young fan, I was pretty scared of them. They may look hokey today, and the monsters may seem slow and cumbersome, and it's surprising how they can sneak up on anybody.
Careful, there's one right behind you!
But as a kid, this movie had me checking the trees for monsters while I walked home from school the next day on a dark British winter night. In many ways, I guess you can excuse the rubber-looking beasts, as it's written into the script that the monsters are made out of silicon. This movie is boring in places, and it does have a very low budget, but watch it for those retro monsters and its horror sci-fi premise with a few beers, and I'm sure this movie will satisfy any fans of Hammer horror, or indeed any fanatics and completists of 1960s British cinema, warts and all.
Nothing seems to get through to them. At the rate they're moving, they should reach the village by midnight.
What else could we do?
Starve them.
The Whip and the Body, 1963, directed by the great Mario Bava. To put it mildly, this is one of the most beautiful looking horror movies from the 1960s that I think I ever saw. Filmmaker Mario Bava was a cinematographer before he was a director, so understandably the look of his movies was greatly elevated by this, and The Whip and the Body might be his most gothic and visually lush film in a career filled with extraordinary visual techniques and colour mastery. It's basically a gothic melodrama soaked in S&M, wonderful romantic colour, themes of insanity, and loaded with metaphors. Because of his unique mastery of language, actor Christopher Lee was in high demand in European cinema after the massive success of The Mummy. But it was his performance in Hammer's Dracula in 1958 and its huge success that was part of what propelled this massive boom in Italian Gothic horror movies in the early 1960s.
Count Dracula. I am Dracula, and I welcome you to my house.
Lee actually moved to Italy in the 60s because of tax reasons and the sheer amount of work that he was being offered there. The Whip and the Body is also heavily influenced by the worldwide success of Roger Corman again, and his visually stunning Gothic tales and Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, and in this case, especially the crazy deranged family and relationship dynamics of his wonderful work, The Pit and the Pendulum.
As he struck, he kept on screaming at his brother. One word, over and over, adulterer.
In The Whip and the Body, Christopher Lee plays a sadistic nobleman who returns to his family estate and is soon murdered, or so it would seem. What follows is a ghost story where it's unclear whether the haunting is supernatural or purely psychological, and that lends itself to some stunning imagery in the wonderful style of Gothic romance that seems to be inspired by something like the beautifully dark romance of Wuthering Heights. Bava shot the film in wide sweeping shots, candlelit shadows, and an eerie use of primary colours that predates his giallo work and his huge influence on the style of other Italian directors such as Dario Argento by several years. So The Whip and the Body is a must-see for any fans of Gothic, or indeed Italian horror cinema, because of the sheer fact that it was so influential in building what will become the tropes of Bava's giallo cinema. Although The Whip and the Body is not as violent in terms of deaths, stalking killers, or gore, but it's still quite an emotionally charged film with scenes of torture and does have scenes of murder. But what Bava began with these stunning techniques can clearly be seen echoed throughout most of 60s and 70s Italian horror cinema. It is quite simply a stunning work of film. Production-wise, Lee said that working with Bava again after Hercules in the Haunted World in 1961 was fantastic. Although Lee didn't like the fact that in true Italian style, he didn't dub his own dialogue in the film.
Are you afraid of me? You were fond of me once.
But it features someone doing a pretty obvious impersonation if he was an American-sounding, kind of middle American Christopher Lee. But it's pretty interesting to watch.
They're opening my tomb. This is the last time I can be with you.
Why do you torture me?
But aside from that, the film had a troubled post-production as both American and British censors hated the S&M overtones and cut large sections out, especially the whipping scenes, which obviously are quite central to a story called The Whip and the Body, causing the movie to be incomprehensible in places in these earlier shorter cuts. But they were the first cuts I saw, and it was still a great looking gothic horror movie, and for me, romantic gothic horror is one of my favourite genres. But now it's been fully restored, it's a fantastic film. The Whip and the Body is on this list, and I mention it because it pushed boundaries in 1963, not just visually but thematically. It's arguably the missing link between gothic horror and the sleazier, more abstract Euro-cine horrors of the 1970s. It's an excellent work of classic retro horror by a director who I consider to be one of the all-time greats, Mario Bava.
What do you think is the major appeal of horror? Why are we drawn to it?
Principally, I suppose, escapism, because it's utterly unlike our real lives, which I suppose today are inclined to be perhaps humdrum. I think that this particular kind of film gives you a jolt, an emotional jolt. It can help you to blow off steam, an emotional safety valve. But principally, escapism into a world of fantasy and unreality and the weird, which I think we harbor within all of us. A basic, perhaps subconscious love for things that we don't understand and don't know.
Many people, of course, see all horror movies as decadent and unwholesome and dangerous.
Oh, I think that's absolute nonsense. I don't see in what way they're dangerous.
Catering for the lower instincts, really.
I don't think so at all. No, I think if a person is already unbalanced, and I think they're very much in the minority. One is always talking about a majority audience, obviously. I think if a person is already unbalanced or has perverted habits or thoughts, perhaps this might, on occasions, push them over the edge slightly. Otherwise, I think it's just a question of the audience going to be entertained, and they enjoy it.
Are you acquainted with the field of genetic mutations?
Yes, vaguely speaking. Frogs that after the atomic explosion produced frogs with two heads.
Exactly.
Atom Age Vampire, 1960, directed by Anton Giulio Majano. Atom Age Vampire is pure radioactive Euro schlock, and I'll say straight out the gate that many other critics have said that this is an awful movie, but I've never agreed.
Yes. She's disfigured forever, as if by a cancer that's beyond control, like leprosy.
There's no one who can help me now. No one.
This movie, for all of its faults, is on this list because one image from it that has become quite iconic now amongst cult film fans gave me nightmares when I was a young film fan. There's just something about this scene, the way that the image moves, the way that it's shot, that just creeps me out. Similar to the iconic imagery of Stan Winston from The Terminator in 1984, or the Wolfman's transformation. It has that jerky, stop-frame feel that for some reason just scares me to death in this movie and a few others. But for me, the best thing about Atom Age Vampire is not the cheesy acting or story, but the creepy, black and white, Italian horror sci-fi imagery that I think makes it very unique. But as I say, for many critics, the acting and bad dialogue makes this movie quite hard to get through, so bear that in mind.
I said,
No!
Have you lost your mind, Jeanette? Those policemen suspect me by this time.
The police were here.
Don't ask me to explain it to you. I don't want to. Hurry up now.
But if only for a few seconds, you can forget the clunky action and bad dubbing and just look at a few of the wonderful, horrific scenes in this cool 60s imagery that I'm sure was quite heavily influenced by the classic horror movie Eyes Without a Face. And if you are a 60s horror fan like me, I think you might just fall in love with it a little bit too.
Now pull yourself together. We have succeeded in discovering a great secret. The secret of spontaneous reproduction of living cells.
It's the secret of life itself.
The secret of life and also of death.
Despite the title, there are no actual vampires in the movie, but it's a cool play on the superstition and culture of Japan. I'm a big Godzilla fan, and like that franchise, Atom Age Vampire is influenced by the atom bombs that devastated the world when they were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
What you mean is exploit the horror by extracting its advantages. The bad which justifies the good, is that it?
More or less, I suppose.
That's why I think this is a classic movie, but also a retro one, as it is very much a product of the atom bomb cloud that hung over the world and still hangs over us heavily on the planet Earth today.
Poor, wretched people.
If you dig deep, I think the filmmakers had a smart message in this movie and also some clear themes that they wanted to discuss, but also do the best they could on the budget and entertain the heck out of us.
And the psychological consequences in these victims?
That's a most intelligent question. Well, the relationship between body and soul has not yet been established.
There is trivia online to suggest that the title, Atom Age Vampire, was simply a bad translation when this Italian-made production was dubbed into the English language. The original title being Sedok, l'Erde di Satana, or Sedok, the heir of Satan. Instead of vampires, this movie is about a mad doctor who uses experimental radiation treatments to restore the face of a woman disfigured in a car crash. That all sounds pretty familiar, right? And slowly, he loses his soul in the process. As his obsession grows, so does his willingness to commit murder and eventually mutate himself into something monstrous.
Really gave me a turn. What are we playing, hide and seek?
Behind the scenes, this movie was most definitely a low-budget rush job typical of Italy's early 60s horror boom. The director, Majano, was better known for TV dramas than monster flicks, but this film's stylish cinematography and grotesque transformation sequences, I think, punch above its weight a little bit and make it an iconic monster movie. And that monster makeup and transformation, although cheap, has that certain haunting quality that makes this among my favorites of early 1960s Italian horrors. Atom Age Vampire, like many movies, is a time capsule of Cold War fears, atomic age anxieties, and I think it's one of the quite early examples of Italian genre filmmaking. It's clunky, but atmospheric, and strangely tragic in the ending. But if you love moody, black and white horror with a dash of absurdity and minuscule budgets...
Take your own life if you want to. Yes, I'll give this back to you. But only on that day when you look me in the face and tell me that I failed you.
This one, for me at least, was pure nightmare fuel, and I think it's at least one that you could have a good time with and enjoy it with friends.
I don't know what will become of us. It doesn't matter anymore. But you'll never see your Pierre again. You're mine. Mine! I'd kill you first.
I cannot accept half-baked theories that sell newspapers. I'm a scientist, not an alarmist.
You're whistling past the graveyard.
The Last Man on Earth, 1964, starring Vincent Price. Arguably the most famous movie on the list. It has to come last. Not just because of its title, but because this movie is a stone-cold retro horror classic.
If somebody can hear me, answer me. For God's sake, answer me.
Originally sold to Hammer, the studio will mention once again, to be made in England, Hammer had problems with British censorship at the time due to their previous violent works such as Curse of Frankenstein, and decided that the screenplay was maybe too gory and the film was classed as unfilmable, and so it was sold to an Italian company. The Last Man on Earth is the first adaptation of Richard Matheson's amazing and influential novel I Am Legend, and so far it's been the most faithful adaptation, also being filmed in the 1970s as a sci-fi classic, The Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston, which is an awesome joyride of a horror movie and one of my all-time favorites.
There's never a cop around when you need one.
And then again filmed as I Am Legend, starring Will Smith in the 2000s. There are also many other movies which are influenced by this classic story, I Am Legend, but that's for another video. Changes were made to the screenplay, originally written by the legendary writer Richard Matheson himself, which he didn't like, so he decided to be credited under his pseudonym of Logan Swanson. Like the other adaptations, The Last Man on Earth has a recognizable star in the lead, horror legend Vincent Price. Here he stars as Dr. Robert Morgan, or Dr. Neville in the original story, the last human survivor of a plague that has turned the whole Earth into vampiric monsters, or so it would seem. Shot in desolate parts of Rome, made to look like a post-apocalyptic America, I think despite its limitations, this is a gorgeous looking movie. It's shot mostly wide and in sweeping shots, and even the dialogue is covered with wide lens photography, which I think gives the film more of an epic feel, similar to the way that John Carpenter shot his low-budget films in widescreen. The main reason I mention this as a classic is because I think it captures a mood of deep loneliness and existential dread. It is mostly due, of course, to the great performance of Vincent Price. It is a very reflective movie with a sadness to it, due to Richard Matheson's complex characters and due to his scientific research which he based the story on.
Perfect. Just wide enough to keep the flesh apart so their body seal can't function.
But it is less action and more atmosphere. Price's performance early in the film shows him focusing on ritual, repetition, and regret. He carries the film with a performance that's tragic, introspective, but totally compelling. He is a horror icon, and for me, the movie is one of his best.
No one is to come into this house. Now remember that.
He delivers a depressed narration over these silent rituals that breaks my heart every time I hear it, and that spine-chilling, soft, and wonderful voice of his makes it sound all the more retro.
I can't afford the luxury of anger. Anger can make me vulnerable. It can destroy my reason, and reason's the only advantage I have over them.
It is a great performance that all Price fans, and I think fans of apocalyptic movies, will love. I first discovered The Last Man on Earth, and indeed I Am Legend, because of George A. Romero, the great horror filmmaker, and him saying that the story paved the way for Night of the Living Dead and the entire modern zombie genre. Because Romero had read I Am Legend and based many elements of his classic movie Night of the Living Dead on Matheson's story. So as a Romero obsessive, I just had to see the movie and I was not disappointed. If, like me, you are a Romero fan, it's worth seeing The Last Man on Earth as it concerns many of the same themes, and you most definitely want to give I Am Legend a read, because it's surprising when you read how much it inspired Romero, and indeed many other modern horror icons. When Stephen King tackled the zombie genre in his great story of the zombie apocalypse Cell, he dedicated that book to Matheson and Romero. So that shows the incredible reach that this story has had throughout film and storytelling history. Here in the Boneyard, I consider it a true 1960s retro horror classic and a great Vincent Price performance that will be at home in the collection of any 1960s horror fan.
They're dead. They've been staked. But these are made of iron. That wood, like mine. Someone else is alive in this world. But where are they? Where are they hiding?
Thanks for listening to my take on just a few of the movies I consider 1960s horror classics. Have you seen any of the movies we discussed this episode? Love them or hate them? Let me know in the comments below. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all my YouTube members and Patreon supporters, and if you haven't already, please consider joining me here as a member by clicking that join icon. If you like what you see, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support independent content creation here on the channel, you can always drop a super thanks or check out the store tab, because it's your contributions that keeps me digging up classics right here in the Boneyard. So please take care, everyone, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.
We're freaks. I'm a man. The last